All right, live here. Just trying to when my camera when I'm testing my camera, the field is tighter and it spreads out. So when I first dial in there, you got to see a little bit of my kitchen in the back there. That's okay, I guess, huh? And that looks okay, I guess. Yeah, feel free whenever. This is Folk You Zeus. This is the world famous podcast that nobody knows about yet, except for you. Very few. Trying to get the word out there. So subscribe, and if you do like the video, please do. That always helps to get these things out there, so we can get more folks involved. This is live, interactive. There's a chat function. If you don't know how to use the chat function, pretty easy. It should be on the right bottom of your screen, and just type something in and hit the arrow. And you have to hit the arrow when you type, so make sure you do that. I'm Mark Zeus. Need to introduce myself, I suppose, every time in case people are coming in for the first time. And I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit here so I can get a little bit more volume. And yeah, this is going weekly at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We're in Daylight Time now, so CDT. And I'll be here every Sunday. One quick announcement is that next week I will be in Florida. I have 2 jobs in Tavares, Florida on Friday and Saturday. So I'll be flying over to Florida for a couple gigs. And I'll be there Sunday. I'll actually be by my sister's. That's one of the reasons I've been trying to promote myself in that area a lot, because I got a place to stay and get a chance to visit with family and that. So I will be there, but I'll be on. So I'll be on Sunday over by my sister's place, and a little change of scenery and kind of fill you in on there. And if you're not on my email newsletter, do get on it so you can know in advance when things are happening and get my performance schedule. This podcast is not specifically just about music. It's also about any arts, visual arts, performance arts, and we'll talk about things that are in common to the culture that art contributes to, and how art shapes culture. And a little other things too, some fun stuff. Today's going to be half fun and kind of half serious. It's going to be the title of this is Genres, Schticks, and Stereotypes. So say that fast 10 times in a row and see if you can do it. Talking about classifications of your art in general. How do you define it? What is it? Where do you fit? That's kind of what this is going to be all about. Like the first question I'm always asked by anybody that doesn't know my music at all, or what I do, and what my performances are like. The first question everybody will ask is, well, what kind? And that's a question that I would ask somebody too, just in general. So if you find yourself asking that question, you're not alone. Is what kind of music do you play? Or somebody might ask, what kind of music do you like? If you are just a listener, not just a listener. Listeners are to my advantage. I'd like to say that I prefer listeners to musicians, and I love musicians, so I must really love listeners. So if you are, and everybody's a listener. Some people don't like music. Music might mean something to other people, and I don't want to get too off on a tangent on the discussion of the definition of music. It is what it is to you. So feel free to comment if you like to do that on that. But I don't want to go too far off base from where we're going. But that's the first question. What kind of music do you play? And so you have to kind of verbalize it and kind of come up with some kind of play a little folk, I play a little blues, I play a little rock and roll, I play a little zen, and it's kind of acoustic. So there's all these definitions that you try to fit yourself into, and especially when you start, when you're just discussing that with an individual, just a friend or just somebody that meets you the first time, and you tell me you're a musician, it's like, okay, so they can kind of relate, and you relate terms that maybe they might know. So, but once you start producing art, and wanting to have it fit so it can be seen or heard, you need to hone out a definition for your music, so that's the first subject. If the three terms that I put out there are kind of, well, they're kind of related or kind of not, maybe. So we're going to discuss that and see if we can kind of smush them together a little bit and see how how the genres will develop. There'll be shticks that you learn from there, and we'll talk about definitions of those words as well. But yeah, the first thing, and obviously, yeah, one thing I'll always do is look up, just get a general Lady Google definition for these terms that we're trying to discuss here, so we get like a basis for where at least the internet in general is putting it. Don't always believe everything you hear or see on the internet and or read on the internet, but this is a general term. We're going to go genre first, and so I'm going to ask her, what is the definition of genre?
Here's the definition of genre: a category of artistic composition, as in music or literature, characterized by similarities in form, style, or subject matter.
Yeah, okay, that's pretty broad, isn't it? So now you've introduced three terms here: form, style, and subject matter. So when you think about those three terms, they seem similar, but they can be very different when you start defining music. I'm gonna use music because I'm a musician, and I will discuss all classifications of art, literature, and all that too as we get on in this little discussion that we're having. And if you're out there, I don't know if anybody is out there. This is a live thing that I just started this, so this is my fourth one. Most people are watching it after the fact, but I do want to get input from people that get on live. Eventually, I know I will have people that are interested in doing this, interested in interacting and working this as a discussion, not just me spewing out my platitudes or pontificating here about this stuff. So, but basically, I'm trying to organize it so that when artists start thinking about getting their art, I mean, if you're a new artist and you have to recognize, well, what have been my influences? Where am I going? Where do I want to place this? What do I want to call it? Uh, so that's where we're going to start with genres, the basic genres, and there are traditional terms that have been around for a long time. Let's say at least maybe 100 years. You could say at least all these genres here have been around about 100 years or more. The terms, because we could go back, and in fact, before we even talk about those genres, we can go back in ancient history and talk about the basic two types of art and music. Any kind of artistic expression, or it was in two general categories, and that was, one was religious and the other secular. These are terms that we use today, and there's that division of the secular. There are people that have secular arguments based on whatever humanity, and without what do you want to call it, the overlook of a religious um, dogma or set of values. So you have religious music, which is, we talked in a previous one. If you didn't see it, briefly just talked and said, back in, like, when we talked about Renaissance. Before the Renaissance, music was overly religious. If you did music that was not religious, it was like devil music. It was, or not accepted in the popular vein, or because the king is going to cut your head off because if you play something that, down with the king. Well, no, you don't say stuff like that. But anyway, but that was, or down with your religion. The king was monarchies are religions in their own way. uh, you can argue that, and I would argue that, just to do, what was it yesterday, another king of England, what good is it, but that's my personal opinion and the only political statement I'll probably make today in general. But anyway, so there was in the ancient times, it was either religious or it was some sort of a secular, was determined as secular. Now, depending on the society, that there wasn't such a hard division, but we can look into the Dark Ages, and that was pretty much it. Anything was coming out of there, going into things like in music and Gregorian chant music and all that old original. If you study any kind of music composition, that's one of the things you'll always study is like old. Where did our notation system come from? Especially in Western music. I'm talking more in Western music. Eastern music has its own set of conventions, you might say, and history. But looking back to that, so yeah, but moving ahead as music got to be more secular, and even on the religious side, the religious music is borrowing from the secular in order to gain access, so your religious thoughts can gain access into people that mainly listen to secular music, or it's their thing. They like that kind of music, the different genres, you would say. And you could call these styles. Okay, there are various styles, and and one of influences the other. But if you're looking at the basic tradition genres, I'll put the first one first is folk music. Now, folk music was you could say was like the general term for that secular music that was coming out. People were just having fun, playing instruments, doing things, telling stories, putting stories to music. You had a thought or an idea and you wanted to get it out there. It's as just you as a individual, you didn't have to have an orchestra play it or anything. So you just even just vocally or with a simple instrument, piano, guitar, or harpsichord, or whatever, as you go further back. So we would call that, and we a lot of times we call folk music ethnic music. So you'd have like, you'd have various European countries will have their own style of folk. So maybe you can put it into that term. So that's more of it. Folk being much more general, because the next genre I'll come up with is blues. Now, blues is a folk music. It has grown from a folk music. It's gotten loud. It's gotten blues rock. Then you start, putting, melding genres together. But you'd have folk, blues. Now, jazz is a blues-based music as well. It kind of grew out of the old folk blues, and got to be a little more involved, a little more interactive, and more based on what do you call intricacies of the music. Um, and then you have country music. Country music grew out of folk music too. So and country has a lot, like I said, has evolved, and there's all kinds of different kinds of country. Or there's a lot of us that are country singers are saying, no, that ain't country. That ain't country. But whatever people. So yeah, that's the thing. You have to kind of like, how am I going to describe this music? It's got a twang to it. Just so if you take disco music and put a twang to it, is it country? So let's, you've got that. Then a major genre, which actually going back to religious music was the main vehicle for that was what we know broadly as classical music. Classical music. But classical music, we kind of borrowed that term from a wider classification within the art music, what a lot of people call art music, like the highbrow stuff. That's, you might have heard classical music called as highbrow. Um, but you'll have but mostly classical music can be determined in the period that it existed. And so we can go back to like the like 1600s and Baroque music. Okay, you probably heard that term if you know anything about music history at all. And Baroque period. Lots. There were a lot of people that was that kind of the style. That's what the way the composers are writing, and that, and it was mostly mostly based on the religion, or uh, sponsored by the religion. Uh, and as you go through the years, classical music became a little less just on the religious. But classical music, see, classical in itself is a period, a classical period, and then there's classical art. So a lot of these terms will carry over if you took an art history course. A lot of the terms in music, there were these movements that came up. There was a classical movement, and it had there's classical literature, there's classical art, there's classical music. Um, so, and then you have like the romantic period. A lot of what we consider classical music is actually from the romantic period, which is in visual arts. It's kind of in that same period as impressionism and expressionism too. Um, so in that general terms, you had impressionist music as well. I think Debussy was considered one, or it's like, I'm not an aficionado on all the classical composers and stuff, but there's a lot of people that, so some in art, you'll hear that term more, impressionist, because that was a huge movement of art, of visual art, where, when we think about music, that's the romantic period. So it's kind of, there's not you can't, well, what's the difference between romantic and impressionism? There's certain. I would argue that impressionism or impressionist art and music are kind of like part of the romantic music period. So it's kind of like country. Like next term I want to bring up is going the other way is like bluegrass. So bluegrass music is considered a country style. A lot of country musicians get it. I like to think of it as like the jazz of country music. It can get, very the players get becomes religion in itself. If you're a bluegrass player, you're into it. You're into that bluegrass, and as you get better, you start to understand that there's intricacies that you want to include or you want to pursue. And then that goes into like Newgrass Revival was basically bluegrass guys that took it to the next level and took it to that jazz thing. There's lots of bluegrass players that are into the jazz theory as well, and integrated into there. So these are just, you have to kind of like say, well, where does my stuff fit? Briefly again, there are things, and when you go into classical, I did a little research and remind myself about, there's things called a concerto. That's a way of organizing a music and presenting it, or oratorio. And then cantata, that's basically, cantata is like a song mainly. That's what it is. You can have instruments, but song. And then there's the overture. Everybody's heard of overtures. And then there's opera. Opera's music with a story. There's a story involved, and there's conventions within that. And then ballet. Ballet's a dance based. It's telling a story through dance with music. So there's all those. So is your stuff, where's your stuff fitting? I don't know if I'm talking to and many classical musicians. Are you writing? What are you writing? Are you kind of following any of these? I would love to know how people that are into the classical, the over term, you might call it. Where do you fit into that? So yeah, and then going to the other side, bluegrass being kind of a country, and I said I'm arguing jazz, country. There's some blues. There's lots of blues and bluegrass. Obviously, bluegrass, um, and then a major genre was rock and roll. Rock and roll. And that gets divided up as you go. And over the years, if you think about it, if you were anybody out there that was alive and sentient and evaluating life back in the late 50s, early 60s, when something came out and it sounded a little bluesy, sounded a little, maybe a little twangy, maybe whatever, but it had this beat, and it had this thing. It was rock and roll. So there was we weren't really dividing, it too far beyond what we thought of back then as rock and roll. Now, as rock and roll evolved, then it kind of started splitting in all different directions. And then you had things that were like blues and off the top of my head, something like a doo wop, doo wop, and it's kind of a little bit bluesy, mostly a vocal type music. It was like it was its own thing. It wasn't really rock and roll. It was, but it kind of grew up in that same period. And doo wop goes way back as rap. I liken rap to doo wop a lot. The same kind of a concept. It was street corner stuff. As you went out there and you just kind of like just started, you're doing the a little bit of harmonies, background vocals. So you didn't have the instruments. You just so a real rap. Somebody that is into traditional rap isn't into doing like heavy beatboxes and sounds and scratching all that stuff. That got to be as it evolved. But the and it was a kind of a what would you call it? Um, Rhythmic, so heavily rhythmic stuff that was, and usually had messages, or discussion about something. There was some substance to it, but don't want to digress too far into that. But and then rock and roll became pop. Popular music in general was, Sinatra was pop. You go way back, and that's popular music. We didn't start calling it pop until later, in that period where I think when rock and roll came up and the news, people were thinking more pop. That's pop music, whereas opposed to this is a little more, had more artsy. So we got that concept of art music in rock and roll in itself. There's prog rock, what they call progressive rock. Where it's a little more involved. There's a little jazz, that heavy theory going on in some of that styles. So, but pop music. Let's talk about pop genres. Where do you fit? Are you disco? Disco was a period music, but there's a lot. If you think about it, a lot of the music coming out, popular music coming out today, is disco. It's just nowadays instrumental. Different instruments applied, a little different things happen in it, but it's it has that same beat. That a lot of hip hop stuff is in that groove. Um, so I mean, it's disco just evolved into another thing, but it's still disco to me as far as I go. Now there's bubblegum. I think bubblegum's a good general term. It's kind of fun term. Uh, you know, that was kind of a spin-off from rock and roll. It was kind of like very teeny bopper based, geared towards a real fun, just you know, uh, kids love it. Kids love the way the melody goes and the beat. So yeah, just in general, I remember old bands, bubblegum bands, Ohio Express, Yummy Yummy Yummy. I got love in my tummy, and yeah, I remember Boyce and Hart was both a singing group and they also wrote tunes, and they were kind of kings of the bubblegum thing too. I mean, it was a whole back in the '60s. It was kind of like all different kinds of little types of music were coming up. Acid rock and was another one that came out. Just the term rock came up probably in the late '60s. You started calling it rock music. It wasn't rock and roll. It was now we had rock bands. You didn't have you had Sha Na Na was doing old rock and roll. I mean, that was Bill Haley and Chuck Berry and the basic um, rock and roll bands. They went to rock, and it was just rock. It didn't roll, man. It just rocked. So when something rocks, maybe it ain't rolling, but usually it rocks and then it rolls. Hopefully, you get it to roll. You get your rock out there and you make it roll. Um, so yeah, the bubblegum thing, and then other punk, punk, just like an anti-music kind of a thing is like most of the guys getting involved in punk, they thought it wasn't important to play your instrument well. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like just it's more important to make it sound kind of like it's not really uh you know together. It's got to be distorted. It's got to be screaming, yelling, whatever it is, and it's got to be anti-establishment type of a sound to it. And punk, and lots of things grew off of punk, and then punk kind of refined a little bit. This is kind of the way I see it, and people started getting involved with new wave, what they called the new wave of rock and roll, and it was kind of like influenced a little bit by punk, just kind of like it had that kind of sensibility. uh, to new wave, and then eventually grunge music in the '90s, and you can keep going on and on. We're adding. See, the concept here that I'm trying to get at is that we're adding. There's lots of ways to kind of pin your music, and as much as you don't want to, and I definitely don't want to say that when people ask me what kind of music I play, I widen it out. I just don't say, right now I could tell everybody up front, the first thing I am is I'm a folk singer. Okay, my I have messages. I do tell stories. The lyrics are important. The music is made so that it's simple enough, but so you can understand all the words and enunciation and all that kind of stuff's important. But you still have to have emotion, and I still want to put in interesting music, keep it interesting. And I like to bust into different feels and to different and use these different genres. I want to do something that's real kind of bluesy, kind of like, and if a set of lyrics fits that genre. So, you know, as much as then you have people that want to just do the blues. Like I said, it's a religion. Like jazz becomes a religion to some people, and that. And a lot of us will use all these conventions of these different genres or styles and apply it to the music that you're doing. But number one is, yeah, if I describe myself, I'm a folk singer, I do an eclectic variety of other styles that support that. So I mean, if that would be my best way of putting it, because I'll do some blues, I'll do a little jazzy stuff. I'm also a country singer. I do a lot of country, a lot. I love singing old country songs, and I write stuff that's you can fit very neatly into the country genre. Classical, I don't know. I don't know if I get too much into it, but I think everybody's influenced. But pop music is definitely influenced by the melodies of especially the Romantic period. I believe. If you listen to a lot of songs, there's a lot of, you can go on YouTube and find guys talking specifically about music that was influenced, but ripped off from classical music. It becomes, this another subject, but there's public domain music, which means it's not copyrighted anymore. It's so old that the copyrights ran out, and it's open. You can do it. You can steal from it and all that. So I mean, so legally you get away. I don't know, ethically, that's your determination for where your ethics lie in that. So okay, moving on. Then from rock, you had hard rock. You had metal, speed metal. You know what I mean? You keep going, and then there's electronic music, and I always kind of was interested in this emo, which I think is electrically motivated, or something like that. Let me. I'm going to pull that one up because I wanted to look that up earlier, but I didn't. What is emo music?
According to Wikipedia, emo is a rock music genre characterized by emotional, often confessional lyrics.
Oh, okay. Confessional lyrics. We're going back to the religious thing, huh? Wow. Often by emotional emo. It emerged as a style of, I'm moving ahead on the definition here. It emerged as a style of post-hardcore and hardcore punk. There you go. So came off from punk in the mid 80s. Hardcore punk scene, where it was known as emotional hardcore or emo core, and pioneered by bands such as Rites of Spring and Embrace. So, okay, yeah, I always thought that was a cool name. Um, Screamo. Okay, I forgot about that one. Screamo rock. So, but anyway, all right. So moving ahead here. Yeah. So that's genre. The next, in the visual arts. Okay, similar period, similar kind of, through there. You do have folk art, folk, like visual folk art. I know that I've talked before about primitive styles, meaning that you it doesn't, the what you would call a depth might not be as important as just images on a canvas, and just, not as far as maybe, but some primitive artists, stick men paint it or something like, are very just impressional, not impressionist, that's the wrong term, but just, you know, but yeah, you can look it up, look up primitive art, and you'll see that it's just it's kind of like punk without the attitude, kind of a thing. It's like you don't have to be real good to do primitive art. I mean, most people that do primitive art understand and can do like very realistic painting and stuff. But yeah, so it's a lot of the same old, traditional terms. And I'd love to get an art somebody that's in the art history here, and do a little bit of a deeper discussion into art, the genres and styles of art, and so if you're in art history, I mean, I've taken some classes. We can discuss that deeper. But yeah, but going through music, you can see if you are an art history person, you can say, oh yeah, that's kind of relates to, especially when we talk about the romantic those periods, older periods. When we got into rock music and all that, it's kind of like there's all these little terms and genres fit, because in pop music in general, because you have to fit. You have to go in and figure out, okay, how are you going to sell yourself? We can tell the A&R guy, well, what kind of music are you doing, or whatever, so you could submit it and say, well, put this in, into the emo category, or whatever the hell you got. So in the same way, I mean, in visual arts, you have to kind of know, do I belong in a museum of modern art, or do I belong in the traditional kind of classic museums, or is there some other kind of a place that my art needs to be seen, and where there's those people, that demographic that comes up and wants to see that kind of stuff. Um, and we're talking about poetry too. Poetry is real, and literature and poetry is kind of related along the same lines, that historic period or movements that the art came in. So there's classical poetry and those things as well. Um, okay, moving on to the next one, shtick. I'm gonna get see if Lady Google comes up with something for me here. But what is the definition of shtick?
Here's the definition of stick: a
Stick.
thin piece of wood that has fallen or been cut from a tree.
Okay, I had a feeling that was going to come up. I'm going to have to type in it. Let me see. What is uh, definition of SCHTICK? See what comes up with. Shtick. Here it goes. She's not talking to me on this one, but a, okay, shtick, a gimmick, which I had in uh, my just out of my brain here. Came up with that. Shtick it says a gimmick, comic routine, style of performance, etc., associated with a particular person. So yeah, that's kind of where I want to go with. It's like, do you want to have a shtick? It's not a negative thing. I mean, it's a lot of great artists in all kinds of medium. Um, So yeah, I was thinking in music. I'm going music first. I'm going Weird Al Yankovic. Okay, he does parodies. That's his shtick, and they're usually parodies that are very what would you call um, uh, absurd. So you can have parodies that are very kind of poignant and politically charged or whatever, but he's parodies absurd parodies. He definitely takes it and he makes the lyric change the lyric so it's comedic and a bit absurd. So that's his shtick, Weird Al. Moving on to another one. Okay, let's look at Andy Warhol. I've talked about him in another um, uh, podcast. Andy Warhol, he was kind of in that overall genre of pop art, but he kind of that was his shtick. You could call it a shtick, kind of a thing where he'd do paintings of everyday stuff, and like almost like it's an ad. He'd like do ads for for. I remember one of his most popular was Campbell's soup can. Who the heck wants a picture of a Campbell soup can, big picture. I mean, he made big picture of it and the painting of it and stick it on your wall or something. I don't know, some whatever, man. That's it. That's your thing. You're into that thing, and I'm, like I said, we don't judge here. I try not to. I make my little comments, but hey, if that's your thing, whatever your thing is, man. But he was in that pop art, did lots of kind of things similar to that, and that's what he's most famous for. That's what got him famous, is being a little bit and like pushing the absurd, you know, to where it actually, if you see a painting of a Campbell soup can, you think, oh, that's an ad. What is it? So you start to see a whole series of Andy Warhol art, and you understand how that all kind of fits in. So, okay, next one in comedy, which comedy is a performance art, is one of my favorites has always been Rodney Dangerfield. Now he's there. You can look at various comics, and some comics have a definite shtick. Other ones kind of like have different. They take on different characters. There's people that do impressions, and that might be their genre. They're an impressionist, whatever impressionist, as opposed to impressionist art. That's what they do. They do impressions, meaning they try to copy the vocal qualities and presentation of a famous person or something. But Rodney Dangerfield, his thing was the no respect thing. So he got no respect. He's self-degradatory language that he would use in his presentations. So he would always, be that. I mean, that was his persona. He came on and was kind of like, well, no, I don't get any respect. My wife hates me, this kind of thing, and she's, whatever. And all his jokes are based off of that concept, is he's self-degradatory. He's kind of like, you go look up Rodney Dangerfield if you have never seen him, and you'll laugh your ass off. But anyway, that was his thing, is like no respect thing. And then you could go into things like wardrobe, obviously rock musicians. If you get to that, we had the hair bands back then. So if you wanted to be on the rock scene back in suburban Chicago over the 1980s, man, you had to have your hair a certain way, you had to, or whatever, they had to have something. So it's how you dressed, how you looked. So that gets into that that gimmick or shtick. Huge artist that most people respect as an artist, was definitely a person that used shtick to get to the next level, was David Bowie. And I'm a big fan of David Bowie, especially his older stuff, and in through like Ziggy Stardust and Diamond Dogs and all, even that period of him in the 70s. He definitely had an unusual. He had a very unique sound, his music, but his stage presence was, I mean, he'd be outlandish in his dress. And then he got to a period when he's doing like androgynous kind of dress, not male, not female. So I mean, we're dealing with the cross genders and the that kind of, that's not a new thing. People have been androgynous, males dressing like females and females dressing like, this is not a new thing. So if anybody in the Generation Z watching this, or Generation Z, Gen Z, that's the new generation, whatever what they call the boomers and the Xers and millennials and all that kind of stuff. Whatever, that's kind of classifications too that I think are kind of like, yeah, who's in the cusp of this and all that. But anyway, bottom line is, if you, but back then we had Boy George. Boy George was a male singer, very bubble. I would put him in bubblegum, and he kind of dressed. He's a guy that dressed like a girl, more or less, androgynously, but it was like, kind of more of a weird, you know what I mean? Kind of hate to use the word weird, because man, it's rock and roll, man. Anything goes, and there's nothing really weird about it all, except when you get to Ellis Cooper. Now Ellis Cooper, now he had shtick. He was definitely, he had and it was that counterculture kind of a thing that he kind of came up with, schools out and all those, where it's I'm 18 and I'll do what I want, that kind, you know what I mean? So he was into that. If if the after the fact, if once you uh, get to know the history of Alice Cooper, you find out that he's very, you know, philanthropo. I don't know if did I say that word right? um, but he's into helping. He volunteers for stuff. He's a regular guy. I think he drinks beer drinking guy or whatever. He's just a regular guy. And but he's got his shtick. He goes on stage and he's got his shtick. And so wherever you find, you have to find a way if you want to get your art out there. You might want to deal with that. Sometimes you have to. Like I said, if you got a rock band that's doing that kind of a thing, that heavier rock kind of pop, you want to get into the pop vein. You can't dress like me. I'm a folk singer. I don't need to dress. Like I don't have to have orange hair. So can you imagine? Can you picture that? Anyway, but so yeah, you have to make these choices, and and it might be natural for a lot of people. It's kind of like tattoos and piercings. I mean, I don't have any tattoos or piercings, and in fact, I have a new song coming up that reflects that. I'll just tease you with that, but that's going to be something I'll be down the road. Uh, but yeah, that wasn't my thing, and my generation, a few people did, like simple, like women obviously wore earrings and there's some jewelry and all that thing. Guys didn't really, I mean, you might see a guy like that would have like a real small earring or something. Those, especially when he's in the rock scene, when he started getting in the 1970s, 80s, there was some of that. And as far as body piercing and tattooing and that, so I mean, there was some of that, but not a whole lot like it is now. Now people paint themselves. I mean, they're and they'll get on stage and whatever without their shirt, and they're all tattooed, and that's their thing. Whatever it is that works to sell your thing. If that's where you want to go, is it about getting the art out so you can get to a popular point to where if you fit into this niche that you got that demographic that's going to immediately kind of accept you as uh being in with being the cool guy or the cool girl. That's you're gonna have that, kind of a thing. um so you can argue that as artists, we don't do that as artists, we do that as sales people. So the art ends at a certain point, and then you kind of say, okay, I got to sell this art, or don't have to sell it, whatever. I made the art's done. uh Now what? Now where do I want to fit it? I got to fit it. I got to put it in. Do I want it to do it once I fit it? Okay, I'm into screamo rock. I'm in screamo. Okay, now what do I have to do to promote screamo rock? Where do I have to be? What platforms do I need to be on? How do I need to look on stage? How do I so you have to divide to make that division. Yeah. One half of you is the artist, probably the brighter side, and a darker side is the salesperson. And I don't want to put down salespeople at all, because they're like I mentioned in the last podcast, or the one before that, that it's important that you have help as an artist to get your art out to various, the proper locations, and get your art out. So a lot of these podcasts that I'm doing it's very integrated, but it's good to think about each of these subjects that I'm going over. It's good to look at them specifically, and saying, I need you find where does this fit? You might do a lot of different, but I mean, or you might say, okay, I'm a folk singer, but are traditional folk venues my best bet? Because I do have a lot of influences from I might fit better in a honky tonk situation if it's that, if I'm doing that more of lively of a band thing that I'm doing. So I do band and I'll do both acoustic. So depending, I might have both sides. So I need to figure out one side. I have to look at these venues, and the other side I have to approach these venues. And sometimes you get like all of a sudden you get depressed because, man, I can't get the gigs. Like I get depressed sometimes because I've been hot and cold in my progression as an artist. I've been fairly popular sometimes, and I gotten some pretty good gigs, and then all of a sudden you say, man, I'm getting, I'm thinking I'm getting better at things, and I'm better, my art's better, but my promotion side is not there yet. So it's like I'm unbalanced to where I need to get. So as an artist, you understand you want to keep progressing as an artist, but sometimes when you progress as an artist, you move away from the popular realm. And that happens to a lot of people that get involved with jazz, as opposed they'll start out in bands. They'll do pop music bands, whether it be a wedding band or be a rock band and wherever. And so you're in that and you're doing that popular kind of a thing. Then all of a sudden you're kind of evolving and saying, well, we're going to move in this direction. It's more artsy. It's like it's satisfying to you or all the players around you that are with you, and you feel like you're doing better. And that's the yin and yang of working in this free market capitalism type of thing, whether you like it or not. You just have to get customers. So you got to look at the way you're going to expand your customer base. So anyway, so yeah, so so a running gag type thing. So you do need to have that kind of thing going on, something that shocks somebody, or something that like Alice Cooper or something like that. And the last thing, talk about stereotypes. Now, all of a sudden, you find yourself being stereotyped. If you've been an artist for a while, it's been doing kind of a thing. Let's say you've been doing like bubblegum music, and you had a couple hits or got some airplay, and it's like, and in your circle, it's kind of like, no, all of a sudden you're getting older. It's like that's not your bag anymore. But people want to come to your shows, and they want to hear that that stuff, because that's what they expect. You've released a new album, and it's like, nobody likes it because it isn't bubblegum anymore. I wanted to do something a little more substantial. And so you kind of get stuck in the stereotypical kind of like, well, okay, that's what we know you as, and that's what you're going to be accepted as. So you got to look at that too. Do you want to be stereotyped? Sometimes that, if you hit it and you're rolling and you're rolling and you're rolling. Look at a band like Rolling Stones, a great rock. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Rolling Stones. I have been for many years, with great energy and just a consistent greatness that they've had in their songwriting. Jagger and Richards and that, and it's like it's been rock and roll. So it has that rock and roll, but the underlying changes that they've gone through, they hit on some things. They did a little country. They went off a little bit. So they had that the one album with Sticky Fingers had a couple like here and there, and you could feel that, but it crossed over real well into them, and there you knew it was them, and you knew that they were using some influence from another genre and borrowing it to come over. I remember they got into that when disco was big. They had a couple. Not off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember the name of the song, but there's, if anybody remembers Rolling Stone, you remember that period that they went through where they had a couple albums where I don't know, there's some of that disco beat going on in there. It's kind of, well, okay, it kind of works for, but they kind of went through, and they kind of, to a certain point, I'd say from when they started in the 60s to into the 90s, you can see that whole change. I kind of lost track a little bit of any of the new recordings that they did. I don't think they did a whole lot, in the last 20 years. I mean, they still perform live, and they still had their following and all that, but you could see that change, and they avoided being too stereotyped. I mean, they were still the Stones. They were a rock band. AC/DC, I remember that interview they had with one of the guys from the AC/DC, forgot which one it was. Was it Malcolm? I think it was. And he said, "Hey, we're just a rock and roll band. We don't." I mean, it's this because like I think the question might have been, well, do you? I mean, you guys are great and known as this popular band and stuff, and you have your style and all that. But have you ever thought of getting involved in different things? Blah 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 blah. He said, "Nah, we're just a rock and roll band. This is what we do." So he's kind of like, just kind of like, yeah, this is it on our niche, stereotype us because that's what we do. It's okay. And for them, but for some people, it's a detriment to be stereotyped. You can't move anywhere from there. So, um, and I was looking at it, and so uh, when it gets to the point to where you get involved with this. Oh, I want to be just like the Stones. So I'm going to do a bunch of Stones. I'm going to do this, and then so I want to copy the music. I want to copy it. So that kind of a thing. Uh, so we're in, and if, but if you, the way I look at it is in, if we look at writers, whether it be playwrights or you write a novel or you're a speech writer or whatever, when you copy verbatim someone, if you copy the writing of someone verbatim, that's called plagiarism. Okay, probably you've heard that word, plagiarism. Okay, if you're in the visual arts and you copy a painting verbatim, that's called forgery. When you copy music, musicians or whatever, copy verbatim, that's called tribute band. So, I don't know that I thought about that and it was kind of like, all right, if I, we kind of, of course, a tribute band isn't saying, well, we are the band, but we're going to play every note as close as we can to and if you don't, the crowd is going to hate you. So if it's kind of like they expect you to play it, verbatim like the record, pretty much. I know there are some tribute bands out there that expand out, and there's like say, and I'm not 100% against it all, but I just want to. It's kind of interesting how in certain arts, if if you use somebody's phrase in writing, and you're supposed to make a footnote, and you're supposed to, hey, I got this from whatever, and then it's kind of okay for. But if but be honest, if you took a whole book, you just rewrote it and maybe changed a few words here and there, and just kind of make it so it looks like it's your style more. Like, but you took the whole story, the whole thing, and just like it's kind of what I wrote. That's plagiarism, even though you say, well, that's original work, you know. So, obviously, we're going to get into discussions about copyright and all that, and get a little heavier into that. But this is good. I thought this was a fun way to look at, to look at the classifications. You have to classify. It's kind of, as somebody's been around for a long time. I hate it. I don't like to get way involved as somebody says, well, okay. But you're online and you have to kind of fit. You've got, they give you a list of about 30 different, and you look down the list and say, well, one of these just doesn't do it for me. And some of them allow you to pick up to 3 or pick up to 4. So as you're putting your stuff up online, they have to categorize it. So somebody goes out and they want to listen to some music online, they'll look Spotify or something. They'll be a category. I want to listen to acoustic music or folk music. That's kind of like kind of the mishmash kind of a thing. Or I want to do hard rock. Okay, heavy metal, whatever. You could put in these terms, and then they'll play a playlist of that music, and that's a whole nother subject as well that we'll get into, getting involved with playlists and putting together that, or how algorithms will react to that kind of stuff. And I'd love to get a guest on that knows a lot about programming nowadays. I know a couple people in radio that might be willing to come in and discuss that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's about it for tonight. A residual message is do your thing, do your art, be an artist. Um, but let that other half, remember that other half, that dark half, has to be able to get the art out there somewhere and figure out ways to get it out there. And you have to determine, you have to fit into these little classifications, for better or for worse. So another thing to look at, and hopefully y'all got something out of this. Again, I'll be in Florida next Sunday, but I will be online. So I'm hoping more people will show up. I don't think anybody showed up tonight, but that's fine. I'm putting these things out there. If you get a chance to listen to the other podcasts that I did, go ahead. I think I'm getting a little better. The camera's looking pretty good. I know that I have to get better lighting, but I think it looked okay. Microphone here seemed to be working good. I've got a dedicated microphone for that. Um, Make sure that if you're thanks for listening to the end here for number one, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and tell your friends to subscribe, and help me get this thing off the ground. It's going to take a while, but if we can get some momentum and get some more people involved, like I said, eventually I'm going to have some guests on and all that. But I need to do this by myself and get it to emotion, get it moving a little bit before I start getting involved with that. And I need to get a program too that'll allow me to do more interactive. So thanks again. I'm Mark Zeus. You've been here at Folk You Zeus. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time.